So welcome to Think and Link, everyone. Think and Link Pants Optional, where we leave it up to you. It's your choice. We don't need to know. We have Rita King of the Science House and Eric Quint of 3M here today. This is going to be a very interesting discussion. We're going to be talking about improvisation, creative collaboration, imagination, and shaping the future. Talk about four big, interesting pillars to have a conversation about. That will definitely be interesting. But first, a message from our sponsor, Capsule. We are the muscle behind this that puts this on. We're a special projects agency here in the North Loop of Minneapolis. We do a lot of work in design, messaging, naming, research, and of course, helping people invent new offerings. We always welcome people coming to hang out with us at this event because we are a curious crew. We put this on for our community to help people connect, get inspired, and in this time, lift their head up and look to the horizon, because it's sometimes a little bit sad, a little bit depressing, a little bit harrowing to get through this. So without too much more to set us up, that's our conversation. I'm Aaron Keller, and Kelly Layton is my co-host. And we're going to have a really interesting conversation. These are the first two people, because I said improvisation, and actually I didn't start the improvisation conversation, that came from Eric. He said that no questions will be given ahead of time. They will take improv questions. So that's going to be interesting, which to me meant a challenge. Anyway, so we'll see where this goes. I'll let Rita kick it off with her background and introduction as to what she's doing there at the Science House. And then we'll turn it over to Eric and Kelly with questions.
All right, thanks for having me. I'm Rita J. King. I'm here at Science House in Manhattan. I'm a futurist. That sounds fancy, but I'm not a crystal ball futurist. I'm a roll up your sleeves and get to work futurist. And I want to create the world we want to inhabit. So the things I work on are mainly related to systems. A lot of the symptoms we see at the edge are just manifestations of systemic issues, and I like to go after that. I started off as an investigative journalist. I'm an artist and a jewelry designer, and work with lots of big companies, primarily on the culture of software architecture and delivery. That's been our main business for a while. And model meetings is the system we use at Science House to do that. I'm sure many of you, especially maybe even now in the pandemic, waste a lot of time going to meetings you don't need to be at. And we started setting out to fix that problem here at Science House. And it led us down the road to the essence of business itself. So it's been an interesting few years, and we've been very busy during the pandemic, as you might imagine, helping people work remotely. So I am here at Science House. I am still in isolation in New York. For us, the pandemic has, we flattened the curve, but it's not over yet.
That's great. Eric, a little background would be great.
Yes, thank you for having me. And my name is Eric Quint. I'm here in the cool north that I refer to very often since 7 years. In the capacity of the Chief Design and Brand Officer for 3M. My assignment is a pretty simple one. You can capture that in one sentence, but then it takes a lifetime probably to achieve all of that. And the assignment that I have is to develop and create a culture of creativity and design as a global platform for the company. To put that in context, the company is an enterprise with a lot of complexity in terms of the number of businesses, 23 divisions, 90,000 plus people, operations in 70 countries, and a lot of technology platforms. And so one of the reasons that I joined the company is there's so much diversity in markets that the company is playing in, and in terms of technologies available, that is actually a playground for every designer. So much opportunity, and that's what I do. I have been for a long time in design, if you ask me what design is about, then I always refer to that as creativity and applied empathy to drive purpose. And that's what we do with our team. And so the team has grown over the last years tremendously. And yeah, we're very proud to be the design force for the company.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Kelly, you want to start them off with the most challenging question we've got?
Sure, and this will probably be the only question I'll have to ask. I know this conversation will be quite intriguing and compelling. I'll just say to Rita and Eric, I know we had a conversation a couple of days ago preparing for the session today. We talked a lot about what you've both seen as a lack of imagination that can hinder the growth for large and small companies alike. Can you talk a little bit about how or what you mean, number one, when you say that the world is entering the imagination age, Rita, we've heard you say that, and why, your perspective on why so much of today's innovation is unimaginative, and what are you seeing companies do about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I do call this period we're in the imagination age, and I view it as a transition between the industrial era, which is not gone, and the intelligence era, which is coming but not fully here yet. And what I noticed when I made a shift in my career from being an investigative journalist to working directly with companies, you know, I worked actually IBM engaged me in 2006 to help them understand the business value of how they were using the 3D internet. And I had to create an avatar in about a dozen different virtual worlds to work with them. It was a really interesting project. And so it got covered, you know, by the press. And so at that time, it raised a lot of awareness about virtual worlds and that sort of thing. So I worked with a lot of different companies exploring their emerging digital culture. At that time, it became very clear to me that what companies are trying to do is leap straight out of the industrial era and straight into the intelligence era with no transition in between. And to me, the transition in between is really imagination. And I say the main skill in the imagination age is applied imagination. So people talk about AI all the time, artificial intelligence. I reject that notion. I think it's an extension of our own natural human creativity, and that we have to take responsibility for our own creations. And at Science House, we say that innovation without imagination is directionless, and imagination without innovation is philosophy. And so we are always looking for that pragmatic sweet spot between, you know, innovation and imagination, and that is where we need to head. And so right now we're in a period of complete social upheaval for a lot of reasons. And from that, we have an opportunity to use our imaginations to redesign, to rebuild, to rethink how people work together. And to answer your question about why there's a lack of imagination, you know, we're hardwired as human beings for a sense of belonging. And part of that is that we easily accept the status quo. We want to fit in, we want to do what other people are doing, we're habitual. Our brains are quite amazing, but they're also quite eager to conserve calories by not expending extra effort. And a lot of the things that we face right now require us to expend that effort. And so applied imagination is a focused way. When there's a lot of ambiguity, it's extremely time consuming and very exhausting, but we have to hold, you know, we have to hold space for a lot of possibilities, and we have to keep moving even as things change around us. And so what I see very often is leaders and companies and people in general just kind of giving up and things seem too hard. I think we need a certain amount of play and rigor at the same time in order to design, you know, systems, societies, education, healthcare. And I think that's the direction we're going in. So that's been my life's work since 2006.
So on imagination, maybe from a different angle, the way I look at innovation, in my opinion, the fuel and the power to drive innovation is curiosity and imagination. And so if you think about the role of a design and a designer, we know all, which is a discussion that goes on forever, that we're not there only to make beautiful products. That's, I would always say, something that is implicit. You get that anyhow from designers. But the collaborative mindset and the creative mindset and the imagination of designers can help us to come up with scenarios into the future, what I call probing the future, that will help us to imagine what that future could look like in order to have a dialogue of what the preferred future is that we want to run after and what we prefer to shape. And the role of a designer in that role is and capacity is very important, because if nobody is coming up with the scenarios of what it could be, we never have a discussion about where we want to be. And I think that is where the creativity and the imagination of designers are playing an immense role in the balancing act in companies where we have the duty to perform on a quarter-by-quarter basis and deliver to our stakeholders. But at the other hand, do we have enough time to think about that future and probe that future?
Nice.
Great, Eric, thank you.
That's great, yeah. So I've got a question for you, Eric, to start off a very detailed conversation about design, because I'm curious about 3M taking on design, right? It was a company that talked about innovation a lot, and you and your predecessor started that effort and have done an immense effort. It's amazing how much design has become a role at 3M. It's cool to see in so many ways. I've always thought about, you know, design and innovation almost like peanut butter and jelly. I don't know which one's which, but it's a definite pairing that needs to go together. What I'm curious about is, what do you see as good design? How do you describe good design? Is that something you talk about? Yeah, sure.
Well, design, like innovation, has different dimensions, multiple dimensions. And it's just because of my role, the good design or a good act of design, let's put it that way, is very much about influence and impact the system, any system, whatever system you work for. And I think it is almost the strategic role of teaming up with across a company in this case, but it can be also in community, to make sure that we use our design thinking and collaborative qualities and capabilities to connect great minds together in order to drive that progress. Another way of looking at it, for me, the act of design has two components. One is to drive and advance innovation, and the other one is all about brand and brand experience. And that's how we manifest as a brand into the world. And if you think about innovation, I think the best say projects that designers can contribute to are the ones that have a social impact. So because I remember I was at Milan last year, and unfortunately not this year, Milan Design Week, and you know, you walk around there, really, there's tons of designers that cranking out stuff that nobody is waiting for. There is no purpose at all in all of that, and it is not driven by with a sustainable mindset, I think, and that is what designers should do as well. And then if you talk about the brand and the brand experience, you know, it is the empathy of designers that need to start to help us to make that connect to our audiences in a way that is exciting, almost sexy, to want to be engaging with a brand so deeply, because you feel related to the values that you want to bring across. And so that is a bit of the field of play where designers play a big deal. And again, you know, a beautiful design that is functional and that is doing its job, that is implicit. That is, get over it. We should do that anyhow.
Great, great perspective. Rita, I have a question for you as it relates to meetings. Kind of a functional term, right? But the first time we sat down in the Science House, you talked about changing how meetings are done. And I thought that was it. I mean, it's almost like the boiler room of every business, right? It's where a lot of conversations happen. It's a lot of the economy of small business or any business, right, is in meetings. So I'm curious, give me a little background and a little more on what you're doing to improve how we meet.
So Science House is founded by James Jorash, who's an inventor, and he's an inventor named on probably 750 patents, one of the inventors at the core of Priceline and lots of other companies. And I'm a futurist, and I did not expect an inventor and a futurist to land on meetings. It sounds so, if you told me that, 10 years ago, in the future, you'll work on meetings, I would think, really? That doesn't seem like where I'd go. Point, that's where the action happens or doesn't happen in companies, and it's where people get stuck. And so a lot of our clients, Science House clients, would want us to come and work with them on imagination and innovation and all the things we set out to do. And then we would find it would be meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, and we need buy-in from these 5 people, and 10 people would agree, and 6 months later, one person would have reservations because it didn't match what they thought they were going to do. And they just weren't getting anywhere with the things they asked us to help them with. And so we, after a while, started, for years actually, studying the meetings themselves. And we, designed, we designed a whole framework around it. But the trick to the framework is you could put it into practice and improve your meetings and save millions of dollars a year. We've had clients do that, and that's great. But the ones that are the Jedi masters of model meetings are actually driving entrepreneurship, innovation, and imagination in the company by practicing it. So the system is really about the essence of business itself, and people realize that once they start mapping their meetings and understanding how they fit together. And so we put the focus on purpose. So I'm very big on understanding what your purpose is. Even as the road shifts and you go in different directions, you should have a sense in your mind of what you're trying to accomplish. Or like Eric said, you run the risk of designing something or creating something nobody's waiting for and nobody can use. So really, when it's practiced in its highest form, model meetings is a way for a group of people to really have extreme clarity around their purpose and to create things that their customers want and that they have a clear path to creating, even amid ambiguity.
So Rita, that is interesting that you say that. If you think about meetings, I see very often that meetings are used for consensus and very much and to democratize thoughts. And that is a very lengthy process where I'm a strong believer that the more you bring the democracy into a creative process, it will lead to mediocrity. And so it's totally not effective. We all feel very busy, but in the end, we are taking the heart out of essential ideas that are floating around in an organization. And so there's a good, of course, meetings are needed to check in and align, and you need to do certain things in meetings, but yeah, we need to be very careful on the consensus mode on things. It's not always very helpful.
It's true. And model meetings has a cycle, and the behaviors in each meeting type are different. So alignment is a meeting type. It's not what you do in every meeting. And we find that that's often what people do in almost every meeting. So that the thing that's interesting, I think, is we all work in silos in large companies, right? And so people have their self-interest to protect, their head count, their budgets, and so there's a lot of ways people can rationalize why they go one way or the other. But in fact, those rationalizations can add up. I agree, it does add up to mediocrity. So by parsing out the different pieces of the process, it makes it harder when you're having an innovation meeting to start aligning, because the behaviors are very different. And so we teach those behaviors. That's our main focus here.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I have a quick question. I'm curious, both of you were talking about some of the skill sets that individuals and companies need to underscore to certainly in this environment and to further innovation internally. Can you both share your perspective on some of the soft and hard skills that you think are going to be most needed?
Yeah, so if I talk about music, which we did a bit together, you know, I like improvisation as a theme very much. Why? Because it's all about real-time creativity. And there's a lot of things that come into improvisation. So first of all, it is the unexpected changes and challenges that will tickle your imagination and improvisation talents, how to deal with it. So it's all about flexibility and agility in the end. But also it is continuously switching between the telescopic view and the microscopic view, from holistic to detail, where you I think get inspiration from. And of course, there's many different routes to get to a solution. There's not one route, and I think the unexpected are very exciting to go. You know, if you go on an excursion and you know exactly what steps to take and where you end up, and some people need that. Some other people, you know, they just say, "Hey, I walk out of the door and I don't know, I just follow my heart," and that. I think that is a theme that is very interesting to use in a way to navigate all of the opportunities, particularly that we have. The skill is important in there, because if you don't have skill, you know, you fall through. Because that's one of the things. Real-time creativity means, you know, you're all together in it, in collaboration. You deliver an act on stage. And if somebody is failing, then the band is failing. And I think we should realize as design teams more often that we should act as a band, because there's a lot of egos and individual behaviors going around the act of innovation and creativity. And it is all about claiming the owner of the idea. But, you know, ideas are nothing in the end. Because if you don't follow through an idea to give it substance and to put it into the context of how to apply it, and then work it out to a value proposition that you can commercialize, then I tell you, I've tons of ideas, but the value of an idea is just a spark and the seed of something maybe big. You don't know. You have to explore. And the last thing I would say is trust. Trust is such an important element in all of this, because I see many routes from great ideas to commercialization go wrong, because you know, you need to have trust in each other and trust in the idea and trust in the system, with a bit of a positive mindset as well, which designers are always have. The glass is half full. In order to bring you there where you think you never could have been on forehand. And I think that kind of little bit of opportunism is needed to bring you in the right spots. So yeah, that trust part is important. There's a nice book about that, The Speed of Trust, from Stephen Covey, which is describing all of this very well. And I think if you don't have trust among the musicians, there's no exciting music.
I agree with that.
Thank you.
I think the term soft skills is very misleading, because they are not soft. They're the most difficult skills. It's just that we leave them for last. And we also assume that some people are the creative people and some people are the people who are not creative. And, you know, in the applied imagination model, I have a slider of fantasizers on one side and followers on the other side. And fantasizers are the people who are like, I've got this idea, but, you know, I agree with Eric. An idea, we all have ideas all day. We have brains in our heads. You know, it's the tenacity to see an idea through, and the exploration of you know, I've been writing a book for 7 years. I've been written multiple drafts of it. I started over again recently, because it just takes that tenacity to keep going. The idea is one thing, but we all have ideas. It's that tenacity to follow through. But I want to build on this idea about music, because before Science House, I had a place called the Imagination Age Salon, and it's filled with instruments, but also things that make sounds. Okay, so not instruments. And anytime a group of people would be together, I would promise them that we could create a great piece of music if we tried. And some people would say, oh, great, a musician, what do you have? What kind of instruments? And some people say, oh, no, I'm not musically inclined. I can't do this. But, I'm an improviser, and I feel like we all have it in us. And so people would, the people who are musically inclined would pick an instrument and start playing. But by the end of the night, we always would create at least one great piece of music, because you don't have to be a musician to get in the flow with people and pick up a pair of spoons and hit them at the right time. And you're still participating. And so it does come down to trust that you'll be able to get in a flow with people. And that requires inclusion. And we make, we talk a lot, especially now, we're having a societal awakening around diversity and inclusion, but I've been passionate about diversity and inclusion my entire career. And the thing that people don't understand about diversity and inclusion, I would argue by and large, is it takes a huge level of trust and psychological safety for people to be able to participate. And we gravitate toward people who think like us or are like us in different ways. That is an obstacle. So one of the skills I think that you have to have is the ability to create a space where people can, I keep this book on my desk, I'll show you, where people can fail. Now, the thing about this book that's funny, failure, a Pulitzer Prize winner, right? So, the reality is, what is failure? I mean, very often it's just a sign that you're trying. And so I think people need to be able to be comfortable to make fools of themselves together when they're creating something. But in the spirit of trying, right? Not in the spirit of being, a bad person that people have to deal with. So that's one of the skills. And I really just think, intellectual curiosity about small things and about big things, because the essence of creativity is just having a lot of material that you can combine from. And that too is a form of improvisation. So I really believe that, heads of state, CEOs, and 5-year-olds are all human beings, and everyone has something to offer you. And so the final skill I would say is, every person is a world in themselves, and in that interaction, magic happens. And I think if you have the attitude that you're always learning, that everyone's perspective is interesting in its way, and you don't judge where the other person comes against your perspective on a hierarchy, then the world is your classroom. And I think you need to have that in order to really to innovate and to exercise your imagination.
Yeah, I like this, Rita. It's about trust yourself as well, not others, but yourself as well. And I see one of the hindrances of driving innovation in companies is the fear factor. There's so much driven by fear, fear to fail, particularly. And yes, failing is learning. That's what it is. I remember when I came into the job, I had a discussion with the CEO, and I said, well, if my team can help to come up with the right arguments to stop initiatives, I will create a hell of a lot of value for the company. And this is the other way around of applying your brain power and your opinion to judge, to navigate the field of opportunity. I have a photo that is dear to my heart when I was probably 5 years old, playing with toys. And for me, this is design thinking 0.1. One way or another, it's in my DNA, but what are you doing there as a child? You explore and discover forever. You have fearless experimentation, which we are not used to anymore. And then there's endless creativity going on, where you explore and learn. And that's why children are so easy to learn. And how sad is it that our education systems and the performance cultures in companies completely take that spontaneous behavior to learning out of people, and I think we should celebrate it instead.
It's funny. I had a Zoom call with my 3rd grade class recently, and our teacher joined. And I remember someone on the call made the comment that I seemed like I was like a little old lady, kind of like a wise old lady when I was little. And when I was a kid, I felt like I would look at the other kids. I always felt like I was off on an odyssey. Now that I'm older, I feel more childlike than I did as a child. And I think that that sense of play can be very disregarded by people as frivolous, and people are so determined to show how authoritative they are. And as soon as someone kind of gets authoritative, I just think they're so rigid in their thinking that they're missing so much. And so that childlike sense of play, I think we have to have that. Children are not being frivolous. They are learning how to solve problems. They're learning how to be in the world. They are, if you sit down and play with a child on their terms, right? Not like an irritated adult who just wants it to end so you can get back to your screen. But if you really play with them on their terms, they're pretty hardcore, like little girls with their dolls. The dolls are poisoned. They drank poisoned applesauce. They're going to die. You need to bring them back. I mean, the play goes to some pretty strange places, right? But if you really go there with them, they're pretty hardcore, and they're like testing the way the world is and how people react. And so it's strange to me. It's almost like adults have collective amnesia about what childhood was like, when in reality, we should be holding on to that our entire lives. We don't have to take ourselves so seriously. And related to this is this idea of imposter syndrome, which I see so many people talking about constantly. And I think, do you, as a person with imposter syndrome, believe that the rest of us are so real that you have to compete against this bizarre standard of reality? No. If we instead just believed all of us are works in progress, nobody is the ultimate authority in anything, because as soon as you know everything there is to know, which you never can, there's always another thing to know. So of course we have to study and become, experts in something. I wouldn't want an attorney who didn't study the law, or a surgeon who didn't go, to medical school. But short that, even then, there's innovations in their fields that if they don't know about them, I still don't want them to be my lawyer or my surgeon, right? So if we're just all learning constantly, we can't go wrong. And I think that should be our philosophy.
So I like the concept of having design thinking on schools at young ages, and keep the machine going of that spontaneous storytelling. Actually, the storytelling is a big thing, to name one. Somebody asked me in some big decisions say changes that I was able to get going in the company, how I was able to do that. And then you ask your peers, what do I need to do in order to get this big change, because I have an idea going. And they advise you have to write a business plan, and return on investment, and and all of that. And I gave it a day of thought, and I thought, no, I'm a designer. I'm a proud designer. I'm not going to do that. And so what I did is, through storytelling and through sharing my vision, I was able to get the senior management inspired, and buying into a strategy going forward that they were very happy to invest into. And I think we lose all of that. So there's education. The countersign of education is that a lot of good things are unlearned, and that's not very helpful, I think. So I remember in the design center that we built, we have a mural, and there were two local artists that I invited to come over to do and make that mural. And I just wanted to remind my people on that that creativity is endless, has no boundaries. And the boundaries are always in your mind in the end. So it's up to yourself. And so I remember when the two guys came over, we were talking about, what do you want to have on the wall? I said, guys, you know what? I have a vague idea of what, say, some guidelines on where to be and where not. But you know, the only thing I ask you to do is make a marvelous piece of art. And when after the weekend we sit together, we look at it, and you're happy about it and very proud about it, then you did a good job. And so you see that as soon as you are invited to give a briefing, you more or less start to put your guidance on things. And in many cases, those guide rails are driven by risks more than by opportunity. And so that happens in companies all the time.
I love that, because people ask me all the time, are you an artist or are you a scientist? And I just say, yes, because I'm both. And I think there's a rigor to one and a rigor to the other, if you will, and they may be different. One is convergent, one is divergent. Maybe you can make a case, although I could argue about that too. But when you talk about storytelling, it's very interesting because my book is about Rome that I've been writing for a long time. And what is it that made Rome, Rome? And why did other neighboring cities not become Rome? Why do all roads lead to Rome and not the neighborhood next to it? And the answer to that is because over time, Rome has been amazing, especially ancient Rome, at telling its own story and then weaving the new pieces into the story as it goes, right? So if you think about the founding of Rome, I won't go down the rabbit hole right now, although I could. Romulus and Remus, these little twins, and they got, their mother was a Vestal virgin and their father was, Ares, the god of war. Okay. People just take that as a fact. Those are our founders of Rome. And ancient gods and goddesses are just woven into reality. Like they just showed up to help you and make families. Okay. But people got really good. So if you think about something like a business plan, once you write that down, it's like, this is the business plan. Okay. But the story changes as people engage with the story. And I think, kind of what you're describing, Eric, to me, this is how the metaphor I use is like every ancient tapestry has a picture. So if you look from a distance, like the mural, you see an image, right? But it also has a golden thread that runs through it, literally a gold thread. And I'm very interested in that gold thread that runs through all the tapestries. And I think, from a storytelling perspective and from the perspective of creativity being endless, again, our brains are there are literally parts of our brains, like the precuneus, lights up when it sees its own face. When I see my face on Zoom or in a mirror or something, it's like, oh, I'm Rita J. King, that's right. And it has a reinforcement of who we think we are. We forget that the chances of us existing at all on a planet in space is infinitesimally small. We're here, we have this spark between voids, and we're so concerned with what's right in front of us that we forget that creativity is endless.
So Rome resonates to me because there's a saying, there's different routes to Rome. And so that's true, because we tend, as if we, particularly if skill and knowledge and experience comes in, then we start to educate other people about what we think is the right route. And then there we go wrong already. Yeah. So Rita, what topic have we not touched upon yet?
I'm curious about the word flow came up, which has been a topic in our office many times, and getting to flow and the contrast between flow and process. Is there a process to get to flow, or is process in contrast with flow? Does it hinder
well, there's a lot of, in technology companies, a lot to talk about process, but that's a kind of an insurance, I think. It is, if you don't know anymore what to do, you fall back on the process. I never have seen a good process leading per definition to a good result.
Mm-hmm.
Because particularly if I talk about creative process.
Mm-hmm.
I have been in ventures where, we did everything you would do according to the process. You go to the customer insights, you do user testing, you do make great designs, you do it again, and you iterate, and then in the end, you look back and you say, sorry guys, it's not what it should be. And so what do you do then? Then you get into super improvisation mode. So I tell the team, forget about what is on the table. take all of the things that we have done in the back of your brain and now let your heart speak and just go for it. Forget about all the constraints that we always hear where little birds are whispering in our ears, telling us what not to go and where not to go, to take that opportunity and just get out what you think based on your gut feel, what is the best. And you see, it's of course heavily built on what you have done before in the process, because you learned a lot. But it is just that extra step that you sometimes need to get you there to make something that is extraordinary and is a right to drive a business forward that is depending on great design. So yeah, that I think is what you need to do to keep going on that improvisation and on that flow. The flow is so important in teams as well. Coming back on flow and trust. You know, I think it's totally not say exciting to be in a corner and think all of things in your corner about yourself, and then jump out of your corner and say eureka, and here's the greatness of things. I see it every year with our interns. That one of the things we want to learn them, which is also not a theme that comes back heavily in their colleges, is collaboration. So you need to work with other people. The challenges we have in the world are too big to solve from within one function. And so the only way to do it is to get different functions together, but also even if you think about all the challenges that we have in society at this moment in time, this is only going to be solved by policymakers and governments and companies and you know, educational institutes to work together to use their different perspective, the diversity of thinking, to bring to the table in order to look at things holistically, not from within a small corner, because everybody is right in their own corner in the end. But you know, to solve it on a global level, sustainability, we never will solve that if we don't have a global approach about it. And so countries that put a fence around their country and say, hey, you guys sort it all out in the rest of the world, and I'm doing what I think is good, is totally not contributing to a sustainable world.
I have to add. Oh, Rita, unless you want to jump in, please do. I was gonna I want to make sure I get this quote out there, because Eric, when we had that pre-call, you had a fantastic quote that's very tweetable for those of you that are tweeting out there. I believe the line was something around we have to do a little less focused on scaling the things, and instead scaling the thinking at 3M, which is an elegant line. I didn't get that perfectly down, but I'm curious, how do you get this kind of thinking to permeate all the pockets and crevices and places within 70,000 employees and the number of countries that have now forgotten, and all the areas? That's got to be an interesting challenge day in and day out.
Well, 93,000, but besides that, yeah, it's, well, there's a saying here that you only need the square root of the size of an organization as an ambassador to get a change and a transformation going. I don't know, I can't find that saying anymore, but so if you think about 90,000 people, you talk about 300 people. So if you think about transformation, you only need to have 300 people on a community of 90,000 to create transformation. So how do you do that? You use, first of all, your imagination to come up with a strategy and a vision. That vision is storytelling. I remember, which I didn't realize, when I was building the design center and it was done, somebody said to me, you know what? We have now this beautiful world-class design center here, but you were talking in the second week about a design center and this design center as if it was there. And I tell you, that gave me the design center, because I was able to talk about it as if it was there. And that's, I think, that storytelling, of course, supported by a strong strategy and a vision, and then connects to what the ambitions of the company are and what you want to do and achieve, is a way to pull people in. And again here, you can be very easily be overwhelmed by the complexity of things. I like to make things simple because if you simplify things, you probably see a way to get into it and to drive progress, even if it is in the beginning just small steps. But in the end, there's an amplifier going to kick in that is going to help you to change transformation. And yes, if you look to what we have done in design so far, people say, well, you have created a great design force in the company and whatever we all have done. But actually, the value that we have created is in multiple different areas. We help the company to tell their story in a different way and to brand and manifest itself in a different way. And we have showed the company that investment into workplaces is very valuable for the happiness of our people and for attracting new talent, which before was never high on the priority. And I can go on and on and on of things. And there is that discussion on the value of design going on forever. And you know, the thing that we have not defined very well is, what do we mean with the value of design? Because all the studies that I see is all about the economic value of design. If you talk with me about the value of design, I talk about the transformational value of design, the creative value of design, the collaborative value of design, and I can go on the strategic value of design. And nobody is ever taking that into the discussion. And I think that is probably the most important, let's say, value that we have created for the company to help them not only within design, but also within impact and influence on the other functions to think in a different way and change mindset.
Wow. Okay, so that's, for everybody's sake, this is what the pre-call was like. It was like amazing. We knew it was going to be good. But Rita, I know you've got an answer or other things to say, but I want to prompt you with this question that we had prepared in advance but didn't give to you. Andy Warhol said that being good in business is the most fascinating kind of art. That's Andy Warhol saying that, which is really interesting in itself. So what is your view on the relationship between art and science and art and business?
I love that you use that quote because that was one of the original mantras of the Imagination Age. So I used to use that quote a lot when I would give talks. What does it mean to be good in business? I think in 2020 and in the future is a very interesting question. What is it that people need, right? One of the things we're coming to terms with right now is consumerism, and one of the realities about being good in business is that you're selling things to people, right? But being good is different than being effective. And I do want to address the topic of flow, because I think this is an important part of it. And we were just talking about flow. So what is flow? It changes time. When you're in a flow state, right? When you're improvising on stage or playing music or writing or playing chess or doing whatever it is that puts you in a flow state, time moves differently. And when you're a public company and you're on a quarter by quarter rigid, delivery of value, it's very hard to justify the business value of getting people into a flow state. But I would argue it's extremely important to do that at the same time for better results, right? Regardless of how you're measuring them. And I just want to put one example out in people's minds, which is, well, there's so many things here that we're talking about that I want to address, but I'll try to tie them together. So does anybody know what business Gutenberg was in before he invented the printing press? So
See no answers.
I'll tell you in the interest of time. I was curious if I knew, but he sold mirrors to the pilgrims that came to Rome, and they would hold the mirror up to the different relics and cathedrals, and the imprint, even though it's not a camera, you can't see it again, the reflection was in there, and you bring that mirror back. But mirrors became the basis of the punch and matrix system for creating letters on the letterpress, okay? So a page is a mirror image of what you print on the page. And so in a very real way, yes, precursors existed with wood block carving and everything, but in a very real way, mirrors turned into books, okay? So there's an ongoing continuum of innovation. And when you view yourself as part of a collective, an improvisational, inclusive collective, you understand that the things you create in a flow state flow into someone else's inputs, right? So that process then becomes one of, you asked earlier, what have we not talked about? I would say architecture. And, a lot of the work that I do is working with senior leaders who are designing mass scale mass scale software projects, $200 million, $300 million software projects. And I agree with Eric, they go down a road, they become agile purists, for example. That's a methodology for developing software, and they all stick to it. And they stick so much to the process that they forget what they're trying to get out of the process, right? So the reason I bring this up is to say that flow sounds like a very floofy kind of concept, like, oh, I'm in a flow state. It doesn't really seem like something you'd want to put people in corporate America. But the reality is that flow state, in that flow state, you can go in the direction of the energy, and you can get better and better at making sure that what you're creating is the right thing. And the right thing is defined differently in different contexts. But regardless, if you're not in a flow state and you're not improvising with the people around you, what you end up creating is not going to be what you set out to create if you stick to a process. And yet you need processes, I believe, in order to keep, they become constraints, not literal translations, is what I'm saying. If a process is a constraint for your creativity, then it can be helpful as long as you understand where it's working and where it's not working, and then you evolve the process itself. That's fine. But there's a lot in there. And from a sustainability perspective, I also agree that, we have finite resources in a world. We have to learn to get better at integrating more sustainable elements into what we create. That also requires flow and imagination.
Yes.
Fantastic. Yes.
Yes. Kelly, do you have
I'm like, what question can I possibly ask? I'm just curious, from both of you, I'm going to shift gears a little bit, but what trends you've seen in design and innovation in the last year that are presenting challenges for both designers and innovators to deliver authentic experiences? And I mean, obviously a shift to digital, we're seeing that, obviously, but any other thoughts or perspectives on what you're seeing and how these trends and drivers may shift post-pandemic?
Well, you see of course, the obvious topics like the data and artificial intelligence and digital are all kicking into design. I think that's just another dimension of design where we can further professionalize and take the example. It's interesting that if I'm interviewed on innovation, it's always about the technology conversion of what is going on. And for me, I mentioned already before, the best innovations are the ones with the social impact. And so I think we should not start with the technology, but we should start with the community and with people and with the society. And I think if there is a role for design to play and an opportunity, never before we have such an opportunity to redesign the world, I think. And so there is a lot of things systematically that are not seem to work. Our financial systems, if you look to the ownership of things, if you think about economics, about sustainability, about how people relate to each other and co-op with their natural environments. So there's so many things that you can have an observation about. Yeah, I'm a believer, and sometimes if I give a keynote, sometimes I say, okay, yeah, we know about the concept of chief design officers in companies, which is pretty new, by the way. It's only a couple of 5-7 years. I think it was one of the first, anyhow, to be appointed. But my question is then to the audience: which country will be the first to appoint a chief design officer? And so what I mean here is that, countries, they are pretty powerful, but they are, and politics is there to serve, citizens in a country, and to make sure that the way we invest in healthcare and education and in economics and all of that is the right way to have a sustainable society moving forward. And we see a few hiccups there, and I think I would invite policymakers and governments and educational institutes who work together with the power of designers and use that imagination and creativity to really redesign the world in a different way that is hopefully a bit more sustainable than the signs that we get now at this moment in time, where maybe we need to start to rethink.
And I think, one of the reasons that we created model meetings, it's not just good for companies, it's also good let's take what Eric is saying, and governments and universities and companies and people start working together to redesign the world. Imagine how long that would take, even with the best of intentions, right? So one of the reasons we created model meetings is to facilitate those in a much faster way. But I want to just address very quickly one of the comments that came to me in the private chat, because I think it's so important. A question about my perceptions on biases in design and software and tech design. And I just want to, say that I believe it is our obligation as citizens and human beings to understand what biases are and understand where we are weak and where we are, where our own biases lie, because we ourselves are constructs, nature and nurture, and every single one of us came into the world at a certain time and place in a certain, socioeconomic bracket, every category imaginable. And we just kind of come in, and then the hierarchy starts getting imposed on us wherever we are. And I think the extent to which we can unlearn what we've learned to take as normal is directly related to the quality of the future we can create on this earth together. And I think it's our greatest challenge and also our greatest responsibility as human beings to do that.
Yeah, I see a lot of also hype around that, artificial intelligence and data analytics and all of that. And yeah, we can predict behavior through all of this. And but it is the way you interpret it as human beings to make it meaningful and relevant in the end. And having an Apple Macintosh available with the most fancy graphic tools doesn't make you a graphic designer. And the same as with all of that data, it can tell you a lot of things, but it all comes down in the interpretation of the data to come up with the relevant and meaningful solutions that will drive that progress that you're looking for. And I think that human component is interesting. I read once an article about that, and said, because if you go further and say, okay, well, if the artificial intelligence and the data can help us to define what that future is and define designs in the best way, then why do we need designers and human beings anyhow? So in the end, we do it all for human beings, and so that's, I think, the core and the center of all of this. And so you cannot ignore the fact that that translation is so important. And luckily, you can do that in different ways. And luckily, people are different. And luckily, there's so many different cultures and value systems around the world. And we need all of that flavor. And so that makes it very interesting to be a designer in these days.
This is, we're running up against the finite resource of time. And we give ourselves an hour, and we are nearly at that. I do have one question that also came from the group that I want to make sure I ask. And it's each of your favorite books, your top 2 books that you'd recommend to the audience, because it's a nice way to extend the conversation into those books. Who would like to start? Rita?
I mentioned the Speed of Trust one, which is a very interesting one, and I like very much. And then if you think about books on you know, one of my friends, they wrote a book about strategic design and how they applied, what the value of strategic design is and how you can apply that beyond business only, which I think is an interesting book to think about. There's a lot of writing out there on experience and brand experience and experience design and creating customer experiences. Which I think is very interesting because in the end it all comes down to how to connect to people. I like the book of Da Vinci that is written, you know, a great mind, a person with so many different you know, aspects and a miracle more or less that is very inspirational. Yeah, I can go on. There's so many books that are.
I'll have to cut you off.
Yeah.
Rita.
I know we're up against time, so I'll just say I also have a long list of books here that I love. But I would make a suggestion to everyone to just pick up the book that's closest to you and open it to a random page and see what it says, because that never fails. I could do nothing in my life but just walk into rooms, pick a random book off a shelf. And in fact, the failure book that I showed you earlier, it was a book on a shelf that I did. It's called Stickomancy, when you pull a book down and open it to a random page. I promise all of you, if you do that today, it doesn't even matter what book, just open it up, look at what it says, it will speak to you. So that's my suggestion for books.
Well, those words will start a new journey in your day. So that's a good way to